Life in a castle was not luxurious. It was freezing during winter months, it was dusty, it was full of spiders and centipedes. Oh, and just wait until you see the bathrooms.
Kings and queens actually needed to escape the disgusting messes that large royal parties produced. Palaces had to be constantly evacuated so they could be cleaned of the accumulated mounds of human waste. Also, livestock and farmland needed the time to recover after supplying food for so many people. So once any tour was over, a swelling cohort of over 1,000 people would keep moving. And they would do this for like a whole year, traveling frequently between royal residences in a vain attempt to live in hygienic surroundings. So within days of a royal party settling in one palace or another, a stink would set in from poorly discarded food, animal waste, vermin from or attracted to unwashed bodies, and human waste, which kinda would pile up in underground chambers until it could be removed. Hallways would become so caked with grime and soot from constant fires that they were fairly dark, and the very crush of court members was so dense that made a thorough house cleaning kind of impossible. And just not worth it. Yes, I know, cleanliness standards were kind of subpar throughout the medieval, Renaissance, and Regency eras, but royal courts were typically dirtier than the average small cabin or home.
I feel like just being locked in the dark is scary enough, but I couldn't imagine the rat punishment. Oh boy, the rat punishment is not for the faint-hearted. If you've seen Game of Thrones, you'll know exactly where I'm going here. Rat punishment involves placing a single rat inside a steel bucket. Now this bucket would be held against the prisoner, usually over their abdomen, which already I bet is very uncomfortable and rather terrifying. But once the bucket begins to heat up, well, that's when the real trouble begins. Desperate to escape the heating container, the rat will begin to burrow through the only soft surface that it can find in order to survive, which in this case was your tummy. Yeah, not great. The surface was the prisoner's flesh. Yeah, you thought Stuart Little was cute? Think again. If he was born in the Dark Ages, he would have had a horrible job. Little high, little ho.
Due to the not so hygienic living conditions during this time period, rats and other rodent infestations were not uncommon, as evidenced by the rodent control pamphlets that were circulated amongst the mass regular populace. Now, the rodent population was very high and very widespread during this time. A lack of high quality hygiene practices kind of led to an abundance of fleas and lice as well. And rodents might have carried the plague, which infested the streets and homes. But yes, we know, fleas were the actual cause of most people's infections. By feasting on rats, fleas would ingest the bacteria that would cause any kind of ickiness, and once a flea bit a human, you see where this is going. Rats, vermins, fleas, lice, excrement, these were all just as much part of the palace as a king and queen. And sometimes this was caused by the unhygienicness of the majesties themselves. When it comes to where folks would have found rats in castles, there definitely would have been rats in the Great Hall, where the meals were, in the kitchens, food storage areas, because rats eating stored food was a constant problem. Now, to alleviate it, people kept cats and dogs, and there would have been a lot of those in the castle as well.
Imagine stepping inside a castle, expecting the grandeur of medieval majesty, only to be greeted by a combination of communal bench toilets and the worst smell one could possibly imagine. Welcome to medieval times. Privacy was a foreign concept, so you better get comfortable with your mates. And when it came to waste disposal strategies in medieval times, well, it was quite simple. Chuck it down the cesspool and hope for the best. Throw it away and don't turn back. Now, the location of said cesspool, that really matters when you're building a castle. Take the Erfurt disaster, for example. In 1184 in Erfurt, Germany, at least 60 people, many which of high nobility, are thought to have drowned by falling into a deep cesspool. How horrible is that? They were immersed in politics. They were negotiating a peace treaty when all of a sudden the floor collapsed. I couldn't imagine a worse way to go out, really. That one stings.
When it came to sanitation, things were always truly disgusting. The link between sewage and disease wasn't really made until like the 18th century, and medieval people remained blissfully ignorant about the health consequences of poor hygiene and poor toilet hygiene. In the garde-robe, which would be a room that hung out over the castle walls somewhat, there would be a seat with a hole, so everything went outside the castle walls, into a river, down a cliff, which, hey, probably didn't smell too bad if it was cleaned regularly, but like, ugh. Most toilets or garde-robes were like nothing more than like a tiny little chamber, and that's where you'd find your bench. You'd find your hole, and the contents would just go out. Super great, into a cesspool. Maybe sometimes into the moat, which, oh, don't romanticize moats. Seeing as the moat was generally stagnant water, it means the stench would have been unbearable, especially in the hot summer. Now, some castles had more than one garde-robe, so they would have had like a private one in your quarters, but then a public one for everybody else to use. Once again, most folks who work in a castle didn't live there, so traffic wouldn't be too high. There wasn't that much need for class-based protocol, but the private one might have been fancier, better cleaned, but yeah. Medieval societies didn't really value privacy as much as we do. So sure, if this was one that wasn't just for the main royals, there would have been a long line of benches, with nothing to separate you from your neighbor as you went about your business. Well, you always had somebody to chat with on the toilet.